All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're diving deep into a topic one of you requested, measles.
Ooh, very relevant with all the stuff in the news.
Yeah, it's been making headlines lately. So to get the full picture, we've pulled together a few sources. We've got the NHS, always a good one, then the Cleveland Clinic.
Excellent resource.
Oh yeah, definitely reliable. And then to see how this is playing out right now, a recent article from the Associated Press about a measles outbreak in Texas.
Combining the science with real-world happenings.
Exactly. And one thing that jumped out at me from all three sources, measles is highly contagious.
Oh, for sure. It's not something to mess around with. One of the things the Cleveland Clinic mentions is that the virus can actually stick around in a room for up to, get this, 2 hours.
2 hours. Wow. Like if someone contagious was in here, coughed a bit and left.
Right, and you walked in 2 hours later, you could still catch it.
That's a bit unnerving, to be honest. It's not like some quick sniffle that's gone in a minute.
No, no. And it's not just being close to someone who's sick either. The NHS points out that it spreads through the air, coughs, sneezes.
Oh, so even talking.
Even talking, yeah.
Yeah.
The droplets can hang in the air.
So it's not just avoiding the obviously ill person. This thing's lingering. Makes you wonder, like, if one kid at home gets it, how do you even stop it spreading to everyone else?
Right, like if you've got a family, you try to isolate, but
But with it in the air like that?
it's tricky. Really highlights how easy it spreads.
Yeah.
In fact, the Cleveland Clinic, they say 9 out of 10 unvaccinated people who are exposed will get infected.
9 out of 10. So almost guaranteed if you're not protected. Okay, so let's say we're exposed. How do we even know? What are we looking for?
Initially, it might feel like a regular cold. Both the NHS and Cleveland Clinic list those typical symptoms. Fever, runny nose, the cough we mentioned, watery eyes.
So sneaky. Mimics something super common. You wouldn't immediately think, oh, it's measles.
Nope. And to make it trickier, those symptoms don't usually show up until 8 to 12 days after you've been exposed. Sometimes, the Cleveland Clinic says, it can even take up to 21 days.
So you could be spreading it for days without a clue. Okay, but then there's the rash, right? That's the measles calling card.
Yeah, the rash is pretty distinctive,
Then-
and the NHS describes it starting on the face, behind the ears.
And then going all over, right? But what does it actually look like? I know it's red, but is it just flat spots or?
It's a bit more than that. The
Okay.
NHS says the spots can actually be raised. They can even form these blotchy patches.
You know, that makes me wonder if it's connected to the virus lingering. Like, it survives in the air so long, maybe that has something to do with how it settles on the skin and creates these more complex rash formations.
Huh, that's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
The sources don't say that directly, but it could be. The virus's staying power might play a part in how the rash develops. Something to look into further, for sure.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that even a rash can have a lot going on behind the scenes, biologically speaking. And about the rash, the NHS makes a point that it doesn't look the same on everyone.
Right, that's important. They specifically say that on brown and black skin, it can be harder to see. That could mean delayed diagnoses if people aren't aware.
So even spotting the rash itself can be tricky depending on your skin tone. And you don't want to miss that diagnosis because measles can have some serious complications, right?
Oh, absolutely. Well, the Cleveland Clinic does mention that a lot of times measles clears up on its own.
Right. But there's that chance.
There's definitely a chance of complications.
And those complications can be pretty scary, right? What are we talking about here?
Well, the NHS lists some serious possibilities. Pneumonia, meningitis, blindness, even seizures.
Wow, that's not what people think of with the childhood illness image of measles.
It can have a long-lasting impact on your health, that's for sure.
And I'm thinking the lingering thing we talked about before, that probably plays a role too, right? Like with pneumonia, is it that the virus lingers in the lungs and then that leads to the infection?
You're spot on. That lingering effect probably does contribute to complications like pneumonia. If the virus is hanging out in the lungs, it creates the perfect environment for a bacterial pneumonia to take hold.
Makes sense. And some people are just more vulnerable to those complications too.
Absolutely. The NHS specifically mentions babies and people with weakened immune systems.
Their bodies just aren't as equipped to fight it off, so the risks are higher. This all brings us to that measles outbreak in Texas. The AP article really lays out how serious this can get.
48 cases, they say. Worst they've seen in Texas in almost 30 years.
It just shows how quickly measles can spread, especially where vaccination rates are lower.
And that's what the article points out. Most of these cases are in kids and teens who haven't been vaccinated.
It's like a textbook example of why vaccination is so crucial. What's interesting is the article mentions this outbreak is mostly in a specific Mennonite community. Now, I know that community tends to have lower vaccination rates than the general population, right?
That's right. Vaccine hesitancy within that community is complex. There are a lot of different factors at play.
Absolutely. And we're not here to endorse any specific view, but understanding those different perspectives is important if we're going to address vaccine hesitancy effectively.
For sure. Science is key, but there are social and cultural aspects too.
It's all connected. But getting back to prevention, the NHS talks about the MMR vaccine. 3-in-1, right?
Yeah.
Measles, mumps, rubella.
Super effective. 2 doses, and the NHS says that can give you lifelong protection.
That's amazing. And the Cleveland Clinic backs that up. They add that the CDC recommends 2 doses as well for the best protection.
Reassuring to know we have such a powerful tool to fight this potentially serious illness, When we think about that outbreak in Texas, it makes it even more evident that widespread vaccination doesn't just protect you personally, but it creates a safety net for those who can't get vaccinated for medical reasons.
Exactly. It's like this web of protection. So if you're listening and you're unsure about your vaccination status, check with your doctor.
Always a good idea.
They can look at your records and give you the best advice for your situation.
Speaking of advice, what if you think you might have measles? What should people do then?
Ooh, good question. And we'll get into that right after the break, so stick with us.
Well, if you think you might have measles, the first thing is to get in touch with your doctor or your local health authority. They can advise you on the best steps to take based on your specific situation.
Yeah, makes sense. And I imagine avoiding contact with others is super important, right? Considering how contagious it is.
Oh, absolutely. The NHS stresses staying home from work or school for at least 4 days after that rash first appears. That's when you're most likely to spread the virus.
So it's not just about taking care of yourself, it's about preventing it from jumping to others, especially those who might be more vulnerable.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like individual responsibility, but also collective action.
A bit of both. So let's say you've seen the doctor, it's confirmed, measles. What happens next? Is there a treatment?
Well, there's no specific treatment for measles, but there are definitely things you can do to manage the symptoms and help your body recover.
Okay, so easing the discomfort, letting it run its course. What kind of advice do the sources give for that?
The NHS recommends the classics: rest, lots of fluids, and over-the-counter meds like paracetamol or ibuprofen to help with fever and any aches.
Good old-fashioned remedies. And fluids especially, I bet, with fever and all that.
Oh, definitely. Both the NHS and the Cleveland Clinic emphasize that. They recommend a variety of fluids, water, juice, broth, just to replenish what you're losing.
Keep those fluids up. The NHS also mentions a cool compress on the forehead, lukewarm baths to help with the fever. I remember those from being a kid.
Yeah, sometimes the simple things are the best. And while we're on home remedies, the NHS also suggests using cotton wool soaked in warm water to gently clean any crusts from around the eyes.
Oh, that sounds nice, actually. I know when I have a cold, my eyes get all crusty and sore.
It's those little things that can make you feel a lot better.
Little comforts. So we've got symptom management. But alongside that, preventing the spread is still key, right? We talked about how contagious this is.
For sure, basic infection control is essential. Hand washing, covering your coughs and sneezes, all that good stuff.
We know it, but it's worth repeating. Are there any precautions specifically for measles?
The NHS advises avoiding close contact with others, especially those who are more susceptible to complications. Babies, pregnant women, anyone with a weakened immune system.
Creating that buffer zone, yeah.
Exactly. And not just distance, but the NHS says don't share things like cutlery, cups, towels, bedding.
Like a mini quarantine within your own home.
It really shows you how easily germs can travel, doesn't it? But the good news is, as we said, measles is preventable thanks to the MMR vaccine.
It's such a relief to have that, and the protection lasts so long. It's amazing that 2 doses can give you lifelong immunity.
It really shows the power of vaccines. And when you choose to get vaccinated, you're not only protecting yourself, but you're contributing to that herd immunity we talked about. That helps protect those who can't get vaccinated for medical reasons.
That ripple effect. So anyone listening who hasn't been vaccinated against measles, talk to your doctor about the MMR vaccine.
It's the most effective way to prevent measles and keep those around you safe.
Couldn't agree more. But let's shift gears a bit. Earlier, we talked about the Texas outbreak and how that highlighted the complexity of vaccine hesitancy. We mentioned the social and cultural aspects, but we didn't really get into specifics. I imagine it's a multi-layered issue, right?
Oh, it definitely is. Vaccine hesitancy, it's influenced by so many things. misinformation, distrust in healthcare systems, religious beliefs, personal experiences, even just access to reliable information.
It's not one size fits all.
Absolutely not. It's different for every community, every individual.
So it's not about pointing fingers or judging, but understanding where people are coming from.
Exactly. And that understanding is key if we're going to address this effectively. It takes open dialogue, empathy, and being willing to engage with people's concerns in a respectful and informed way.
Building that trust, providing accurate information so people can make the best choices for themselves.
That's the key. It's not about forcing people to vaccinate. It's about giving them the knowledge and understanding to make informed decisions about their health and their family's health.
Well said. Now, before we finish up our deep dive into measles, let's recap the main points for our listener.
Sounds good. We've covered a lot, from how contagious measles is and those potential complications to the importance of vaccination and the whole vaccine hesitancy discussion.
Measles is highly contagious. It can be serious, but it's preventable through vaccination. Early detection is important. Getting medical advice right away can help manage those symptoms and prevent complications.
Right, and while most measles cases do clear up on their own with proper care and rest, complications can happen. And like we said, certain groups like babies and those with compromised immune systems, they're more at risk.
We also talked about taking steps to prevent spreading measles, staying home when sick, good hygiene, avoiding those who are more vulnerable.
And of course, that conversation about vaccine hesitancy. We can't stress enough the importance of understanding different viewpoints and having those open dialogues to address concerns and promote informed decision-making.
It's been a fascinating deep dive, and we hope you, our listener, got a lot out of it. Keep exploring this topic. Keep those critical thinking skills sharp.
Absolutely. There's always more to learn.
And on that note, we'll leave you with a final thought-provoking question.
Okay, let's hear it.
Considering that Texas outbreak and all the complexities around vaccine hesitancy, what strategies can be implemented to effectively address it in different communities while respecting individual autonomy and promoting public health?
That's a big one. It's going to take careful thought and a nuanced approach.
Something to ponder. We encourage you to keep exploring this important topic. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
Okay, so we've talked about understanding different viewpoints on vaccination, but at the end of the day, what can individuals do if they think they might actually have measles?
Right, like what are the concrete steps?
Acting quickly is key. Both the NHS and Cleveland Clinic recommend contacting your doctor or your local health authority right away. They can give you the best advice based on your specific situation, what your symptoms are like, and if you've been exposed.
So don't wait and see, basically.
Exactly. Early diagnosis is so important, not just for getting yourself the care you need, but also to stop it spreading further, especially to those more vulnerable people we talked about.
And speaking of preventing the spread, what can people do to minimize that risk? We touched on this before, but it's worth repeating.
Absolutely. The NHS really emphasizes staying home from work or school for at least 4 days after the rash appears. That's when you're most contagious, so minimizing contact then is key.
Like a self-imposed quarantine almost.
Exactly. It's about protecting others.
Right.
It goes back to that idea of individual responsibility and collective action, working together on this.
So you're at home, isolating, waiting for this thing to run its course. What can you do to manage those symptoms in the meantime? We talked about over-the-counter meds, the home remedies, anything else.
Yeah, both the NHS and the Cleveland Clinic are big on staying hydrated, especially if you have a fever. Drinking plenty of fluids, water, juice, broth, whatever works for you, just keep replenishing those fluids you're losing.
Easy to forget when you're feeling lousy, but so important.
It really is. Dehydration just makes everything worse. So even if you're not super thirsty, keep sipping on something throughout the day.
And those aches and pains, the fever, any tips for dealing with those specifically?
Over-the-counter medications, like we said, paracetamol or ibuprofen can help. And the NHS suggests those comforting things too. A cool compress on the forehead, a lukewarm bath to bring the fever down.
Oh yeah, I remember those from when I was sick as a kid.
Sometimes the simplest things are the most effective. Just make yourself comfortable.
Simple comforts. So while most cases of measles clear up on their own with this kind of care, we have to remember those complications can still happen.
Right, and it's important to know what to watch out for. Things like trouble breathing, a stiff neck, seizures, or the very high fever that doesn't go down even with meds. Those are serious signs, and you need medical attention right away.
So it's finding that balance, right? Managing it at home, but knowing when it's time to call the doctor.
Absolutely. Trust your gut. If something feels wrong, if your symptoms are getting worse, don't hesitate to reach out to your doctor or go to the ER. Better safe than sorry.
Well said. This has been a really insightful deep dive into measles. We've covered a lot from how contagious it is to the possible complications to the importance of vaccination and all the complex issues around vaccine hesitancy.
We've also given some practical advice for managing symptoms at home and knowing when to seek medical help.
And I think the main takeaway is that measles is preventable. The MMR vaccine is safe, effective, and it gives you long-lasting protection. So if you haven't been vaccinated, talk to your doctor about getting the vaccine.
It's the best way to protect yourself, your loved ones, and your community.
And as we discussed, it's not just an individual choice. Vaccination contributes to herd immunity, protecting those who can't get vaccinated for medical reasons.
It really shows how we're all connected when it comes to health.
We hope this deep dive gave you, our listener, a better understanding of measles, from the causes and symptoms to the treatment and prevention, and even those social and ethical considerations.
Definitely. It's a complex topic, but we encourage you to keep exploring it and to have those important conversations about vaccines and public health in your communities.
Knowledge is power. Stay informed, stay curious, and most importantly, stay healthy. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.